At the Volkskundemuseum, or in English it's called the Museum of Austria, Museum of Folk Art and Folk Life. We would like to call it People Life Museum. We decided today, right? Museum of People Life and Art. Okay, we have to think about renaming the museum. We can do that after, when at the very end we come to wine, and I think we might find new names for this museum that is much more than a museum. It's a very important space. And actually it won also the Museum's Prize in 2018 for its non-conformist and innovative museums work, and also its impact on program attitude and the work practices. And Matthias BEITL has been running this museum, has been working here for many years, and is a museum's director since 2013. Yeah, and Matthias BEITL, I would ask to tell us now the story.
Well, welcome everybody to this place here. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for the wonderful work we had together, Beatrice and Nora, so that I was invited to add my name here. I just wanted to kind of tell you a short story how all this started. We had in 2014 a transdisciplinary seminar, the Schnittpunkt Ausstellungstheorie, organized in December 2014 here in the museum, and we kind of cooperated in this. And the topic was that beyond the political, theoretical, and curatorial stock-taking, the seminar wanted to ask about critical structural action in exhibition institutions. Together with Martin Fritz, by the way, you see here in the back of your seats the door of my office, where Martin Fritz 20 challenges for public institutions are posted. So I use this when I guide people through the house. I always use this door for a sort of brief discussion. So Martin Fritz was in this, Valeria Graziano, Stefano Harni, Hannah Hari, Susanna Milewska, and Luisa Zeyer. And we spent 2 days discussing and imaging other institutions. And as it is written in the foreword of the book, we simply wanted to get some air, because cultural production is subject to an increasing economic doctrine with all its effects on production processes, substance conservation, and content. Furthermore, in recent years, we have seen an increasing turning away of cultural policy decision makers from their responsibility as stakeholders. I think that must change now. The needs have been clearly defined from a variety of angles and institutions. So back in 2014, after our seminar, I was so enthusiastic about what I had listened to that I immediately approached Nora STERNFELD and said, why not publish a book? At that time, Nora answered something very clever. She said, relax, first the resources, then the book. And then 2017-18, Nora and Beatrice initiated the book project again. So whilst Nora's attitude, first the resources, then the book, is becoming increasingly important to me in my work in a cultural institution. So I find increasingly important this work of art for me. It's called Soweit das Budget reicht, as far as the budget allowed. It is from Bildstein-Glatz. Because it says everything somehow. So it stands in the way of the general obligation to fulfill all the time in the common competition driven by economic framework conditions. So I hope this book marks some waypoint in this context. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Matthias. So actually then there was this moment that we dared to start with this book, because you know that Schnittpunkt is also part, is the ECM curatorial directors team, and so we have at the University of Applied Arts, we have a publication series that's called Curating Exhibition Theory in Practice, and the series editors is the team of Schnittpunkt. These are Martina Grieser, Christine Hauptstummer, Renate Höllwart, Monika Sommer, Nora STERNFELD, Luisa Zeyer, and myself. And this publication series is part of the edition Angewandte, and this is edited by Rector Gerald Bast. So we could edit this book, especially in cooperation now with the Volkskundemuseum. I always say it in German, but we'll find this new word. So this series together with Matthias BEITL. And I'm very happy that Barbara Putz-Plecko is here with us tonight, because she is not only the vice rector, but she is also always supporting us in everything that we do there, and also helped us with this book series. Thank you, Barbara.
Yeah, thank you very much, Beatrice, for this introduction and the invitation. And I want to extend a very warm welcome to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you on behalf of the University of Applied Arts to this presentation of the book Gegenöffentlichkeit, organisieren, Kritisches Management im Kuratieren. I already tried it in English, the English version, organizing a counter-public critical management in curating. And as can be gathered from the cover text, this publication about which you will receive more substantive information in the course of this launch. This publication results from an urgent need to make an appeal for unity of thought and action. Critical thought should be followed, you can read this here, should be followed by critical action and a critical discourse about the present and future of the museums that takes issue with the merciless commercialization of public institutions such as museums, puts working conditions in question and makes a demand for a revision of organizational structures and decision-making processes. In this new publication put out by this group of ECM Schnittpunkt in collaboration with Matthias BEITL, 12 authors addressed the twofold question: how can museums be organized differently, and how can space be created for various forms of counter-public? When I first took the book into my hand and lived through it, and I have to tell you that it was not more possible than just look through it very briefly, I was suddenly reminded of a comparable complex question which had previously been posed by Carmen Mersch and her Documenta 12 research team regarding art education, namely, alongside affirmative forms of art education practices in which experts, authorized speakers of the institution address themselves to an equally specialized and self-motivated public that is by nature an interested public. and alongside reproductive forms of practice in which art education takes on the function of introducing the public to art and educating the public so that it can appreciate art and become the future visitors. And finally, alongside deconstructive forms of practice with the participation of the public, critically examine museums, art, and educational canonizing processes. And that's not a question. How can we develop transformative processes in which the conception of the functions of exhibiting institutions can be broadened so that the institutions can be considered to be actors in the collective shaping of society? I think that here, especially at point 4, transformative processes, this publication puts a focus. In the transformative discourse, exhibitions and museums are viewed as institutions that are susceptible of change. Structure and organization, content and methods are subjected to a critical assessment with regard to the power relations that are implicit in them. This assessment process itself becomes the very substance of the work with the public. The transformative discourse stresses institutional change as a goal that necessarily involves the fostering of critical thinking and self-empowerment. And I realize that we are here today in a museum, and then now look at you, that has recently seen magnificent bold step taken in the direction of institutional transformation. And for this, I really would like to offer my heartfelt congratulations to our host, Matthias BEITL. Yes. So now, how such processes of change can be reflected upon and how a counter-public can be organized is the topic of the book being presented here. And as I told before, I am really eager to hear more of it and learn, and I would like to sincerely congratulate the editors and authors of the book. And finally, I wish you all very soon some inspirational reading. So thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Barbara, also for putting this in this context. And yeah, there's when you do such a book, I mean, there's so many people involved, and we would also say thank you very much, first of all, to the Angewandte to enable this book, but also to Angela Gavran, the publishing house from Gruyter. It was very uncomplicated, again, to do this book, to organize it, especially also with the help of Anja Seipenbusch. She also helped us to have this setting here tonight and also to organize this. And we would not read this book as it is if we would not have Katharina Sacken. She's the fantastic, diligent lector and proofreader. Thank you very much, Katharina. And that we have this book in the hand, and it is like it is, so beautiful that it is thanks to Renate Holbert, who did the design and layout, and is also, more than that, she's also like a co-editor. You would not know without Renate what to do with, thank you very much. We would also like to address our thanks to Isa Rosenberger, who has a very important part in his book, also with her picture, with his photographic series that we see tonight even here. Thank you for making this impossible possible. And last but not least, we would like to thank all the authors and contributors to this book. So a big applause for all of you. Thank you. Yeah, and now I think it's time also to go deeper into it. You would all like to know what the book is about. You see here the questions that we posed, and I would like to ask Matthias and Nora to help me to go quickly through these questions before we then go into a discussion. So, and we have two guests here also tonight, Lorena Vicini and Livette Coulin, and we are very happy to discuss with you later on, but now let's walk through this book. So maybe Matthias, you want to start with these first questions, right? Whom do the institutions belong to?
All right, the first part of the book talk about practice and ask who do institutions belong to. So Barbara Steiner is one of the authors. Is it right?
Mm-hmm. This
yeah.
Is, yeah.
All right,
mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah.
She's head of Kunsthaus Graz since 2016. She was director of the Galerie für zeitgenössische Kunst Foundation in Leipzig, was running art associations in Ludwigsburg and Wolfsburg, was teaching at Kunstuniversität in Linz, and she does lots of other things in curatorial and publishing work. So her essay compares the organizational structure of Niederösterreichische Kulturwirtschaft GmbH with the Austrian government's 2017-2022 program Kapitel Kultur, and points to a paradigm shift in the management of cultural institutions with corresponding effects on current artistic, curatorial and institutional working practices. Then we have Dieter Wogner. Well, we'll stick here. Dieter Wogner, most of you might know him. He's an art historian, university lecturer, exhibition curator, and museums planner. In 1989, he developed the concept for the Museumsquartier in Wien, and together with Renate Goebel, he founded and directed the Institute for Cultural Studies from 1990 to 2001, and 1994 he started his company Bogner CC, which is nowadays Bogner Knoll, and is dedicated to museological planning and curating of collections, presentations. And Bogner is also the founder of the Friedrich and Lilian Kieseler private foundation, and nowadays together with Gertrud Bogner he manages the Kunstraum Buchberg in Schloss Buchberg am Kamp. And in this contribution they had a discussion together, he had a discussion together with Nora and Beatrice, and it was about that every constellation of historical as well as contemporary objects in the space necessarily has content, and that every content-based statement in a museum that is oriented towards the public is political per se. He furthermore establishes that museums are inherently socio-politically active institutions. He puts participative communication projects on the same level as curatorial exhibition programs, and is certain that there cannot be uncritical action at any level. So finally me, as an European ethnologist, I work in the field of museums since 1997. I'm active as vice president in the Austrian Museums Association. I worked for ICOM, ICME, and last couple of years I did some cultural projects for Erste Bank. My central mission as director of this place here is the future of this museum. well, and the vision for alternative working cultures. Between 2009 and 2011 is kind of important from all my thoughts. I was very much involved in the discussion about the merger with the Völkerkundemuseum Wien, which we finally stopped because politics only wanted solutions but no concepts. So this was the big difference. And in my contribution I asked whose museums, let's use them, and it focuses on organizational structures and on the working conditions of museums between vision and reality, with views on Germany and Austria. And the article is driven by ideas of chasing away institutional thinking in terms of growing so-called professionalization, but on the other hand, to redefine institutional work, kind of trying to be creative, fair, creating social value for those who own the institutions, and this is the public. So.
Okay, thank you, Matthias. So the second chapter now is focusing on the question which public and which work. Nora?
Yeah. So, so we told you that actually what was more or less the engine for us to start with the whole process of rethinking institutions was that we were very unhappy, as Barbara Putz-Blecker already said, to teach and to read and to talk about critical theory while we have to teach and do uncritical practice. This was extremely unsatisfying for us, and it is still, because of course, only because we do this book, this is not over. So the second part of the book tries to understand what's going on, I would say is the most theoretical part of the book, and Stefano Hani is a, I would say, philosopher and scholar of critical economics. He founded Critical Management first in the UK, and now he is at Singapore Business University. He, together with Fred Moten, did a book that is very important for me called The Undercommons, that you can find online as a PDF in German and English. And together they are thinking about how black thought and anti-racist thought can come together with a radical critique of what he calls logistic capitalism. And he was here also during our workshop thinking with us about how the new ways of governing us, of accessing us through infrastructure and logistics are filling into everything we do. I mean, we all know that, and this is the thing. We start everything we do with debt. That's why I said to Matthias, let's not start with debt. Let's just start when we can. And we are forced to start with debt. What does it mean that we already, I mean, if you are a student in the UK, what does it mean that when you come out of the university, you have already a huge amount of debt? So the way we are governed and accessed completely restructured the subjectivities and lives. And how can we act within that? How can we think and act together in a world that isolates us? This is more or less the question that Stefano Hani comes up with in this text, and he proposes to think about the let's say slave struggles, the history of slave struggle, and what we can learn from that for struggle today. The rhythm of work and the possibility to become a criminal within that, to go under commons and fight what seems to be unfightable. Then my text, I will talk about it a bit later. I am more or less learned a lot from Stefano, taking up his question, how can we act together in a world that isolates us, to think about how the term public became more and more important in institutions that themselves became more and more private. and how we are used to accept that privately organized and structured institutions actually talk about public space, which means that the conditions of production became less and less important for us, and we think that the public has nothing to do anymore with ownership, which is sad, but we will talk about that later. This is what my text is about. Then there is a beautiful text by Valeria Graziano that helped our students already a lot when they did the public program. Valeria Graziano thinks about public programming. She's teaching in the UK. She actually did her PhD with Stefano Hani, so she's a curator, she's a theorist, she's also an activist and an organizer. And what she's thinking about is how can we understand public programming when we take both of the terms very seriously, the public and the programming, when we understand them as organizing counter-publics, more or less.
Good, thank you, Nora. And now the last question that we posed was what to do and how. So now, after the more theoretical parts, we come into practice. And we asked Martin Fritz. He's unfortunately not here, but he's present, as Matthias stated already, with the door, with the 20 theses, how I called him. Martin Fritz, is a curator, a long colleague, and he's now at the moment rector of the Märzakademie in Stuttgart. And in his text, he tries to sketch to find a bridge between spaces and how there can be new spaces created. And so for him, it's always the questions the content and the communication should be more in a deeper relationship together. He uses words like contact zone, but then he tries, the German word is Begegnungszone. He thinks which comes from infrastructure, from traffic, but it fits maybe better, but then he thinks the shared places, what it could be in the end. So it's always also about building alliances between organizational and conceptual parts. Then we have Wolfgang Tobisch, and Wolfgang Tobisch is also here. We're happy that you are here. His background is art historian and cultural manager. He has been for 10 years economic director of the Technical Museum in Vienna. And in his very personal essay, he speaks about more than 30 years of his experience as a cultural manager. So what he does is that he gives us very practical tips which make things possible, like his view or how he thinks that critical management is possible. So these extend from a very generalist approach through having the courage to make decisions. It's about decisions makings, but it's always also about taking responsibility or asking questions of value to the thing to take a really firm stance, to have a strong position. This is another topic or another hint that he gives us. Then we have Lorena Vicini. Or we have
You want Lorena first or Laurence?
Laurence Rassel. Laurence Rassel, she has a background in art and pedagogy. She's feminist, a very strong feminist, and she has been in 2008 to 15, she was director of the Fundación Antoni Tapies in Barcelona. And she tells us about her approaches and about her ideas. So we had 2 talks to her in this book. And interesting with her is that almost all the projects that she has, it's always the idea what an exhibition or an institution is involved in the public and in the process. So for her, she's always involving the public, and for example, one of the things that she did first is to open the archive. This was a big step that changed a lot. So, and she questions how structures and work, who they are in order to collectively then change them. So she analyzes and then she tries really the step further. And now in her new role, this was the second meeting that we had with her, now she's director of the ERG, which is the École de Recherche Graphique, École Supérieure des Arts in Brussels. And here now she is using, with this totally new task that she has as a dean, she uses the principle of communing. And this is, so it's a kind of collective process of finding forms and structures, and she really tries to run now this school collectively, an art school that is run collectively. So this is her new goal. And then, last but not least, we have Lorena Vicini, but she's with us tonight. So she will talk about her text later on. Lorena Vicini, she comes from Sao Paulo, and she works as a publisher and as a culture manager. She is at the moment also a PhD student in the Kunsthochschule Kassel. And her big topic is the decolonization of institutions. And you will give us an insight to this later on. So very happy and welcome that you're here. Yeah, and then we also included this series of photographs contributed from Isa Rosenberger. So, as we said before, we really asked her to photograph the impossible. So the question was, how can you photograph counter-organization? This is a big challenge. Isa Rosenberger, she's an artist. I think most of you will know her. She lives also in Vienna. She's working in various media, such as also photos and videos and installations. She works on topics like memory, social and political transformations, and also of reading history and in a different way. And yeah, you made it possible, and it's great that you're here. So maybe I can ask you also to explain a little bit more, because it's also fantastic that you have the installation here now in the museum. So you can explain us how you met this challenge.
Yeah. So first of all, I would also like to add my thank you to this invitation tonight, but especially to this wonderful invitation to contribute to your book. And as you mentioned, it was a challenge. So I recollect when Nora and you approached me, I thought, I was very happy, of course, very interesting invitation, but then, okay, so how can you make it visible to think about alternatively about structuring or organizing and running institutions? And the other point was which institutions we should present. So it was also a collaborative process, I would say, that we three together decided which institutions. It's now 2 institutions. The first is the Museum of Impossible Forms in Helsinki. It's a very interesting small art space, and artists and activists run space, I would say, in the east of Helsinki. It's located in a shopping mall, and it's in a working class neighborhood. And maybe I can also confess it was, I mean, it's a very interesting institutions, but there are many interesting institutions, on several, let's say. And we talked about which would be possible. Nora knew the Museum of Impossible Forms, and then it was also a pragmatic decision, because I was in Helsinki anyway, so I could meet them. So it's also interesting to talk about economic backgrounds. And the other institution is, of course, the Volkskunde Museum, for multiple reasons, which I think we heard already. today a lot about. And yeah, and then my approach was that I would like to start with interviews with the persons behind these institutions and behind these kind of approaches, also to learn more about this thinking for myself. And then I also made a lot of photographs, many photographs, with the idea that the spaces itself tell a story and tell about what is happening there and how they are used. And then I tried with these collages to bring together these different elements, and I used a method I know from video editing, that it's on the bottom you always have a wide shot from the spaces. On the top you have more a kind of a zoom, a detail, and then it's somehow superimposed or cross-faded, so überblendet in German, with a quotation. And I must say one of the biggest challenges was to choose the quotations, because I think I had like about 3 hours of very interesting audio material, and how to really extract the quotes that maybe tell you more about the institution. So this was for me the biggest challenge, and I would really like to invite you to read them, because I think they give really a good insight about this very interesting thinkings behind these institutions. And what I also want to add is, with this metaphor of this video editing process, I also wanted to emphasize that it's about motion, so really setting into motion structures, setting into motion institutions. That's what I also like about the opportunity to have them printed out today, so that you also get more this physical aspect and this motion aspect. And as I said already, I would like to invite you to read the quotations, and I would like to finish my brief presentation by reading to you one of the quotes by the Museum of Impossible Forms. Actually, I talked there with, I hope I pronounce her rightly, I don't speak Finnish, Marianne Niemela and Christopher Wessels. And the quote is, the title Museum of Impossible Forms is drawn from an interview that Sun Ra gave in 1971 in Helsinki. He says that in the world today, what happens, what exists, is a result of the possible. And from that we deduced that we should possibly think about the impossible. Another strange person who also triggered that title was Slavoj Žižek. Slavoj Žižek says it is so much easier for people to imagine the end of the world than to imagine changing the world that exists.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, so I think we just go back to the very first slide, because now we come to our discussion. Yeah, and so I can ask you now, Yvette, Lorena, and Nora to join me on this floor. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so maybe I would really like to start with Nora as a co-editor, and you told us that you will tell us more about your thoughts and about what you wrote in your book, your text in this book, which reflects also on curatorial public and the infrastructural conditions. So, yeah, can you give us an insight in this?
Yeah, actually, when I wrote this text, this was just at the very end of the 6 years that I was teaching in Helsinki. And where the Museum of Impossible Forms very much came out from our collective thinking in Helsinki. And at the same time, or a bit later, when this new institution, the Museum of Impossible Forms, was founded, something amazing happened. Paul O'Neill came to Helsinki, who is actually here tonight. And when I left Helsinki, my last evening in Helsinki happened in his new institution, an institution that he is directing that is called Publics. And we had the idea that I would do something on this last evening together with Bassam El-Baroni, who is an intellectual and curator from Alexandria, now living in Helsinki because he became the professor of curating and mediating art, which I was before. So my last evening, his first day, more or less, we sit together in Paul O'Neill's space, which is a very beautiful space and has a library that Helsinki really needed so much, and it's a donation by Paul O'Neill to Helsinki, which is amazing and creates in somehow really a public. Now, I was a bit unhappy with what he invited me to because he wanted a more or less casual conversation. I wanted to talk about something. So at the end, he said, okay, then why not? Let's talk about publics. And this gave me and Bassam El-Baroni the chance to think about it. And the more we thought about it, the weirder it got, more or less, to think about this term of the public. Because we realized that the more public became ubiquitous in the like to talk about it is everywhere in the contemporary art world, everywhere in the curatorial field. You could not imagine to teach curating without reading and talking about all these texts about the public sphere. The public sphere is extremely important for the debates of the 20th century, of course. People would relate to Habermas, they would relate to Hannah Arendt, to Terry Eagleton. And all this you would read in this curatorial context. Of course, you would say, you know, the public sphere in Habermas emerges from the literary scene. You might say the public sphere actually emerges from the hidden, and then you would say, of course, in Hannah Arendt, the public happens when we come together. But you talk about all this while, at the same time, as we have heard in the introduction to this evening, institutions become neoliberalized. So you talk about this while the conditions of productions are more and more privatized. And this made me think. Now, I thought more and more about it. It's more and more scary since I think about it the last 2 years. And the text in the next book will be about collections and what happens with them. Because if we think about it, if we think about the Louvre, the beginning of, let's say, the public museum, from a revolution, the public museum, we would never understand the word public just as something that is out. What is out would be related to what is owned by everyone. So the public was related to the commons in the beginning of the world. But now it's very possible for private institutions all over the world to make more and more public programs. So we now don't think anymore that something that is public has to be owned by everyone. And somehow we can say this is an expropriation of the public that is happy about it because we now think that if Getty, let's say Getty, for example, a private company, is taking care of an archive, for example, of Alan Capro or Susan Lacey, then they will take care of it for the public. But no, it's a private company and we have absolutely no idea, we have no right to see it in the future. It might happen, it might not happen. This is what the private is about. So if we believe the private is public, for me, this is a contradiction in itself. And I realized that in that evening in Helsinki when I prepared for our talk. And then I was actually thinking that this institution that Paul O'Neill, which I'm very grateful for, and I think Helsinki too, took over, came up from a real public moment, from the cultural institutions of Helsinki fighting against the establishment of a Guggenheim Museum with public money. They did not want that a private museum would be founded with public money. They went to the streets, they self-organized, they had many plenary sessions and discussions and so on. And because Finland is Finland, at some point, the governmental politics was to say, okay, if you think you know it better, you will get a very small amount of money and make something. And then the cultural field had to imagine themselves what kind of institution they would want. But it was not enough money, no structure for that. Anyways, there was some money, so they founded an institution, they called it Checkpoint Helsinki. The institution Checkpoint Helsinki actually came out from a public, self-organized struggle of the cultural field in Helsinki, and then couldn't sustain itself because there was no public money anymore, and private money had to come in. And private money, which was Kone money, I don't know if you know this, anyways, I don't tell you the story, but Kone is very important for the cultural field in Finland. And this private Kone money, of course, forced this institution that came out of the struggle to professionalize, to curatorialize, to reimagine itself and find the perfect figure to direct it. And yes, they found the perfect figure, Paul O'Neill, and Paul O'Neill renamed the institution that was now sustained by private money in Publics. This is how I start my text. So I just try to think about what's going on, more or less. Maybe we can stop here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for bringing in also Paul O'Neill, who is here and who this gives me the chance to announce that tomorrow evening we will have a talk with him and also his book presentation at the Angewandte. So tomorrow at 7. Yeah, and now I would like to come to Lorena Vicini. Lorena, we said before that your topic is this decolonization of institutions, and in this book now you wrote about the decolonization of the management, the cultural management. So, and you get very concrete with some examples. Maybe you can also share them with the audience.
So, do you hear me, Jana? So good night. I thank you so much for the invitation. It's so good to be here from São Paulo, so far away, and I always learn so much when I come here in this displacement. It's very, very useful and brings me joy because I can learn a lot of things about myself as well, not only about institutions and being here. So thank you so much, you both, for the invitation. And so I also would like to explain a bit about the context that I wrote this text. It was 2017. It seems just 2 years, but it's actually a lot when you think about what's going on. And I was in the context coordinating a project at Goethe Institute, São Paulo, that it was called Episodes of the South. And it was about decolonizing the knowledge and the mind and the body, and it had several projects in it. So it was a 3-year project funded by several institutions in South America, in Germany, and so on. And it was about exhibitions and research and group studies. And the aim of the project was to think about this other epistemologies of the South and these exchanges that could bring in this relationship between Africa, Brazil, South America, and Europe. And so I was coordinating this project, and it was a really interesting project, but at the same time, it kind of bothered me how it was kind of an schizophrenic role as coordinator, because I was always talking about post-coloniality and bodies in the public spaces and how to respect other epistemologies. But when it came into structure, so when it came into honoraries, payment, and how to write emails to whom, we were always back to the same question, this, whiteness of institutions. And of course, sometimes it was possible to hack the procedures, so it's always this kind of building alliances in the institution. So, I don't know, the financial department, so we were in Brazil, and sometimes there were projects, I don't know, in Amazonia rainforest, and Germany kind of asked us for eine Quittung. And then and it was impossible because nobody gave a quittung in a boat. And then the financial department also made this effort to come along in this duty of decolonizing the structure. So it was really a very interesting experience in 3 years. And I think we made some efforts and some displacements, but and then in this book, in this text, I also describe some of the projects and some of the challenges that we faced. For example, I don't know, when we organize an indigenous culture event, how does the institution behave when facing this epistemology? Is not only, for example, I was the coordinator and I made several mistakes, just as, I don't know, putting all indigenous artists in a room like this and pretending that they were going to talk and bring some results from this talk. So how I myself as coordinator was also very challenging in this duty of decolonizing myself in this role of institution. So that was 2017. And then I was very curious about how do this gap between institution and other epistemologies could be smaller. And then I started my PhD with Nora in Kassel, and it was also a huge experience about colonizing and decolonizing institutions. And now I must say that, for example, I went back to this text to talk to you tonight, and I don't know, it's kind of, I must say, sounded naive to me, because some points of this, because I know 2017, it was a very different period from my country politically, and I don't know, in 2017, I had this feeling and this vision, this perspective that it was possible to decolonize an institution, to decolonize a museum. And then when we talked, Beatrice and I said, can you make a question, and then I can think about it. And then she said, so your starting question could be, do you think it's possible to decolonize a museum? And I said, that's the $1 million question. But nowadays, it's, I don't know, coming from Brazil and working in Brazil, it's hard to believe in it, because we are always facing a double temporality, and I don't think that's just the case in South America, but here as well. Just an example, I've been recently in Reina Sofia, and the wood that was the Genovais building, the new building of Reina Sofia, was built with the wood of Amazonian rainforests. So this colonial epistemology is in the structure, is in the core idea of museum. But at the same time, I think we were just talking about it, and I saw in Isa Rosenberg's work that you thought about changing the name of the museum, but then you decided to remain. So I think it's interesting to remain in this decolonizing idea as an ongoing idea, as something I'm sure I will die and I will not decolonize myself enough. But it's also a process about it. So I think that's it.
Okay, thank you for this very honest also approach. Yeah, and Yvette Collin, so you have been, you're curator of the collective WHW, What, How, and For Whom, working in Zagreb and Berlin since more than 20 years now. And since June, a part of the collective is, you're also collectively ruling the Kunsthalle Wien.
Ruling? Okay.
Managing, and so my question, I'm sure it's very interesting now, the working conditions that you had so far, and also to see it in a bigger institution. So what has changed? Maybe you can give us also some hints.
What has changed? So there, 4 of us have been working together for 20 years now. 3 of us have accepted a job to become co-directors of Kunsthalle Wien, and 1 of our members has stayed in Zagreb to run an experimental education program called WHW Academia that we started last year, that has each year 8 to 12 international students spending 7 to 8 months in Zagreb and being mentored and going through a kind of co-learning process together with resident professors. I would say the biggest change, it's a structural change, of course, for us as a collective, is coming from a very non-hierarchical working unit of 4 to 7 people. So we had, in Zagreb, we were together and alone, 4 of us, for first 10 years. And then in 2008, we hired a first person who is our office manager. And she has been with us now for 10 years. So 5, and then a technician, also a woman. That would be 6. And that's about it. And then, of course, the artists and people we invite. And now we have been working, of course, in Reina Sofia, in large institutions, but of course it's different to be somewhere as an invited guest curator and to work on the content exclusively, while not really working on the structure of the institution. Now here we are responsible for an institution of, actually, together with us, 40 people. And it's a city institution that is completely funded by the city. It's very hierarchical. We have to learn how do we open ourselves as a collective, and how do we open up the institution so that people can approach us. We would very much like to transform the institution and the way how it works, but to do that, we also have to learn about the institution, to know it better. I mean, it's been only 4 months. What we feel is that it is very kind of divided into departments really, really strongly. We would like to see whether we can work around changing and transforming that so that there is less division between production, curatorial, educational, marketing, technical. Let's see. I mean, these are all the things that we would like to, but we would very much, in that respect, I mean, one of the biggest shocks was that the budget is unfavorable to art as anywhere else, no? I mean, you have the big amount that goes to the salaries, then you have the big amount that goes to the museum quartier, to the Betriebskosten, or however they are called, and different other things, and then little by little you come to the production funds. What we would like to also kind of try to challenge this by turning more things into artistic and research processes, so involving artists in all levels of the operation of the institution. These are the plans for now. I mean, the first exhibition that we are curating will open on the 8th of March. And it will be called Of Bread, Wine, Cars, Security and Peace. It is a title taken from a writing by Bilal Kbeiz, a Lebanese writer, that in a text written almost 20 years ago, where he writes about the class segregation of dreams and how people in the first world dream of science fiction, while in the third world, Beirut and Croatia, Balkans to a certain extent, we dream of the simple things, the bread, wine, cars, security, and peace. And we would actually like to see how this has changed in the 20 years, and how this notion of good life has also transformed for the former West, and what are the, you know, what are the changes. So it is going to be a group show. So many of the things that we would like to explore will be explored for the content, for the art, which we will be, for the feminist practices that we will invite, for the anti-colonial artistic practices that we will invite to work in the museum. But we would very much, and we tried to do it before, and one of the ways how we do it is also for working with artists through longer time, through years, developing long-term processes, so that we also challenge the self-exploitation of us a bit, this need of developing new projects all the time, and also what members of Ruan Group actually said now recently in a talk in Secession, and what you also mentioned in your text, the curating as a kind of extractive practice, so that you actually really develop relationship over the time. And we would like to continue using Kunsthalle as a platform, as a shared resource for us and for many artists in Vienna and internationally. Of course, this is a great platform to create new things that we couldn't in Zagreb in small institutions, so we will also work with many of the people that we didn't work before.
Yeah, well, many steps to be done, and many steps that you already took. I imagine as a collective, working as a collective, as you within this infrastructure that you have now and the quite hierarchical structure that it was so far, I imagine that this is a big change also for the team. Do you?
For the three of us, and for the fourth member, Anna, I think the biggest challenge will be actually not to continue working on two parallel tracks, Zagreb and Vienna, but to have it kind of intertwine and to continue to communicate and develop joint programs together. Because she has a handful of work with 10 young international students that just arrived. For us, I mean, Kunsthalle has been very, very challenging. But in terms of how do we communicate with each other, we always make all the curatorial decisions together, meaning, I mean, we divide the reading or things, and then we come together and we sit and we discuss and we talk and talk and talk until we come up with the title of the exhibition. We select all the artists together. So we really work in a very non-hierarchical way. But then, of course, if let's say we have, I don't know, 20 artists, then we say, okay, we will have 7 each to kind of coordinate and then follow until the end of the exhibition. I think what will now for us be very interesting is how to learn how to be more aware of our hierarchical role, no? Of the fact that we are now suddenly, I mean, the directors, that people don't necessarily enter our room as freely as they would enter our room in the office in Zagreb. This is something very new for us, no? We have to figure that out. I mean, we're still like, oh, okay. I mean, we have to ask, we often have to ask people, I mean, people will not just come and tell us things. We have to set up the structures so that people can come and tell us things within the institution.
Yeah, it reminds me of the changes that Matthias also told us that you did when you took over the institutions, that you opened the structure totally, and also I think sometimes when you say the door is open or not, this makes a difference. And what you did, that you opened up the director's room in a common room for the whole team. And I think like the structural steps, often spaces, and often the questions, how can we change things, could be interesting questions for all of us to ask.
I agree. I mean, so far, I mean, it's really, I mean, again, as I said, we need to learn still about the institution, I mean, to see how we can open it up, how we can transform it, what are the, how the things are working, to see what are the possibilities. But yes, what we would definitely like for now, the priority for us would be to see how we can, through the meetings, through joint projects, through working with artists differently, maybe try to shake the division between the departments.
Mm-hmm. So, knowing also that we are running a little bit out of time, that also you have to leave, so I would like to open to all of you. Maybe you have some questions.
Yeah, because Nora, you mentioned that now you made the book. Of course, it's not done. So, what are the next steps for you? Or anything say some words about?
Yeah, this process that we started years ago has completely changed me, and maybe I am now not able anymore to survive in this field. I don't know. I mean, this is. Lorena can talk about it. I'm in this small town of Kassel. It's about building a new institution, and I cannot accept the fantasies and lies and imaginations that some things that obviously are a contradiction in itself are not questioned. Like about building an institution in the neoliberal world we live in has so much to do with all these contradictions and lies and so on. And I don't know. I mean, I can only say that I get up every day, I go to bed every night, I feel like I fall down all the time, but it's still worse. So I think, I mean, what I hope is that this book is one of a series of books that we did in the last years. Also, my book is the book that came out before on radical democratic museums. And I hope by doing this work that at some point it will just become impossible for many people to continue with the same. So that at some point, when you did read this Zizek quote, at some point it will seem so unbearable to continue with it that we will be many and that something will happen. And so in the moment I feel I have to continue with this unbearable, but honestly I'm very tired of it too.
It's also what Harney says about this thing about being formal and informal, that you have to fight with books, with exhibitions, but you don't have to believe it as the only way of fighting and struggling, because it's not the only way.
Yeah, and I think it's also what the book really wants. The book wants to challenge ourselves and others and to think further. It's just a process that we go on.
And don't forget, somebody will be reading this book in 5 years, and you know, it's not a book. The book is really like a message in a bottle in a way. In a way, you are doing something that you can't really know. And this is what is also really beautiful about the books as such, that they are kind of defying this Of course, there is the audience numbers that keep being, pushed, and whether you are selling the book, whether it's sustainable. But on the other hand, the effects of the book cannot be immediately measured. You do it, and then how it will affect whom at which point, you really cannot know. And this is what is also very beautiful about it.
Yeah, thanks. This is so beautiful, because I really think it's, and I also think it's worth it. It's worth it to make ourselves see how this complete contradiction between critical thought and uncritical action is going on and on and on, and just to make this discrepancy not so easy anymore is already a good outcome, I hope, for everyone who will read the book.
So we will continue to ask ourselves about how to organize institutions differently. We can do this tonight also with some wine. If you like to get the books, you can get them tonight at a special price. And again, you are all invited tomorrow to come to Paul O'Neill, and now have a wonderful evening. Thank you very much for coming.